Welcome to the second event in the Clarence Brown Film Festival. We're so glad you're here. We're so glad to be doing this. I know you've read all about it, so I don't have to tell you a lot of stuff because you already know it. I'm Nelda Hill. I work with the library, and I've been working with my good colleagues to present what is a unique and long-needed film festival about Knoxville's own Clarence Brown. To start the proceedings, I need to thank our sponsors. We've been so fortunate, and the entities around town. Knoxville is really a supportive city, and never have I been more grateful than as we sought help in presenting this film festival. So we need to thank the Jane L. Petway Foundation, the Mildred Haynes and William Elijah Morris Lecture Endowment, the East Tennessee Historical Society, Clarence Brown Theater, the Tennessee Theater, Phoenix Theaters, the Knoxville History Project, the Friends of Knox County Public Library, the University of Tennessee, Stowers, where are you, Mary Pond? Family Foundation, WBIR, WUOT, and Film Knox. It's my pleasure to get to introduce the first speaker in our festival, Farran Smith Nehme. She grew up in Alabama in the 1970s when cable TV was just getting started. And as you probably recall, a lot of cable TV content was the showing of old movies, which she watched with her parents. She became, in her own words, a film geek, and she transformed her love of the medium into a fascinating career. As a film historian and movie critic, she has bylines at Criterion, Sight and Sound, Noir City, as well as every mainstream and industry publication you can think of. In 2005, she started a blog called The Self-Styled Siren, which is now available on Substack. She's written extensively about the first century of movies and curated a series on pre-code Hollywood for the Museum of Modern Art in New York. If you can, go out, try to catch her article on Intruder in the Dust, which will be screening on Sunday. Last but not least, she wrote a lovely little rom-com called Missing Reels that is available on Amazon and also at your public library. So, with that, I'd like to introduce Farran. Nehme.
Thank you very much. I'm having a really good time in Knoxville. Very pretty, friendly town. And I'm very happy to be here to celebrate the great Clarence Brown. 2005 was really when I started writing about movies. I started the film blog Self-Styled Siren, and it's hard to say it took off, because it was never, like Instapundit. It was always like a very small kind of specialized blog that people found if they happened to share this interest. But it did start getting some attention. So in 2013, I was invited to Syracuse University to talk about being a blogger by my dearly missed late friend Dave Riley. He ran a blog under the name Lance Mannion. And the class was called Public Intellectuals and the Digital Commons. Just imagine my imposter syndrome, public intellectual, yeah, that's me. But Lance liked to call it blogging for fun and profit, which made it more relaxing. And I met his students. They were not film majors. They were, very young, very charming. And so we started discussing classic film as, what my blog was about. And Lance happened to ask if anybody had ever seen a Bette Davis movie. And what followed was the most terrible 30-second silence of my life. One young woman, God bless her, I really hope she's having a great career right now. She said she had seen and liked Mildred Pierce, starring Joan Crawford. And another young man said that, he had seen and liked some John Ford films. There were a couple of others who really liked Audrey Hepburn, one big Grace Kelly fan, but it wasn't like a what I would call a wide array. So I still think about that class because I see myself as a sort of evangelist. I am convinced that anybody can be a classic movie fan. It is simply a question of seeing the right movies. So I wanted to get a sense of who I'm speaking to this afternoon. Tell me, can you raise your hand if you have seen a Bette Davis movie? Oh, this is beautiful. That is great, yeah. When you're young, you're often thinking about like moving forward in time with cinema, right? And you're eager to see all of the new stuff as it's released. And I get that. I myself have worked as a film critic. I covered the art house and the indie beat for the New York Post for about 6 years. So I'm not indifferent to current film at all. But my own cinematic passion, my voyage, if you will, I've known for a long time, was kind of fated to go back in time. What I would like to say here is that it is also very much a way of finding things that are new. So one of the first things I'm asked when I go on a podcast or if I, do an interview or something is, how I wound up becoming a classic film freak. I would get people who were older than me going, like, oh, you're too young to know who Theda Bara was, and I'm like, no, I like this stuff. But I've never really developed a pat answer for it. The truth is that I got into classic movies because they were, just kind of in the ether when I was growing up. Now, I'm a mother. I have 3 kids, and my oldest twins are now 20, and Gen Z, their cohort, is also approaching its early 20s, and things have changed really dramatically. Home video reached saturation point a couple of decades ago. And now, since the advent of the internet, self-education about film, it consists of what you decide to seek out and not so much what finds you because you turned on the TV. So when I was growing up in the 70s and the early 80s, top secret information, a simple flick of the dial could bring up an old movie, hundreds, even thousands of them. There'd be a morning movie, there'd be an afternoon movie, and a late night movie, black, white, Technicolor, all eras. And this was not TCM. TCM is very carefully curated. They have themes of the day or whatever. Nobody on the stations that I was watching seemed to, be arranging them by director or star or anything else. The TBS Superstation had something called Academy Award Theater on Sunday mornings, and you might get a really famous movie, like How Green Was My Valley, which won the Oscar in 1941 over a little film called Citizen Kane. Or the Academy Award Theater might also be showing something that got a technical nomination, such as The Rains Came, directed by... Yes. And I really like that movie. It takes monsoon rains, a collapsing dam, and a plague epidemic to break up Myrna Loy and Tyrone Power. You should see it. But nowadays, if you develop an interest in film and you don't necessarily plan to study it in college or whatever, if you are a methodical, systematic person, which I am not, you can go about it in a very methodical, systematic way. You can, for example, take the list that the magazine Sight and Sound puts out every 10 years. They poll a bunch of critics about the greatest films of all time. And you can start with the top 10, and then you can work your way down to the 250. And then if you're a real maniac, you can move on to the director's list. You can also start with spine number 1 of the Criterion Collection and their Blu-rays. You can go to a website like They Shoot Pictures, Don't They?, which has a list of 1,000 great works of world cinema. And I know some people that have done this. I admire them. I am more than slightly intimidated by them. But as a kid in Alabama, I was limited by whatever the TV programmers chose to show, as well as when they showed it, and also how they showed it. So if some lunatic at WGN out of Chicago decided that in the morning they were going to show the majestic Western Red River, directed by the genius Howard Hawks. And then in the afternoon, they were going to show the very non-majestic Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy, directed by the non-genius Charles Lamont. I could either go with it or I could, switch to cartoons. So consider too then that our modern day obsession with high definition images, 4K, and correct aspect ratio, that wasn't even on the horizon 40 years ago. These old movies were not being shown because TV affiliates were dedicated to film preservation. I mean, maybe some of those guys were, but for the most part, they were shown because they were cheap. They were frequently on 16 millimeter. They were readily available to fill in a gap in the programming. And if your gap was the wrong size of the movie and you needed to cut a over 2-hour movie down to 1 hour and 15 minutes, they would do it, and they would do it ruthlessly. I had Martin Scorsese likes to talk about seeing Citizen Kane in the movie theater for the first time and going, wait a minute, is this Citizen Kane? Because every time he had seen it on television, they had cut out the newsreel section that opens the movie. Yeah. I had my own similar moment when I first saw Alfred Hitchcock's beautiful film, Rebecca, in the theater. And they got to that scene where Mrs. Danvers is showing, poor Joan Fontaine, the lingerie that Rebecca used to wear, running her hand through it, going, look, how delicate, And, the lesbian implications of that scene are, hard to miss. But I was sitting there going, I never knew this was in the movie because, clearly, it had always been cut when I saw it. But my favorite story about this is one that the great critic Andrew Sarris used to tell. He said that he once encountered a man at a party and they're sort of talking, and Sarris tells him, I'm a film critic, and the guy says, oh, yeah, you know what? I'm in charge of showing movies on the local TV affiliate. And Sarris says, oh, that's nice. Do you enjoy your work? He said, yeah, I enjoy it a lot. I really feel like I can add something. So those Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers movies, I have vastly improved them. I have cut out all of those boring musical numbers. So Sarris, he just kind of slunk off in horror. He said that for all he knew, this programmer went on for years, just wreaking havoc with film history. So, I'm kind of making this sound like a nightmare, but the fact is, to me as a kid, I was often sick. The neighborhood kids that lived around me thought I was a weirdo. I can't imagine why. So the roulette wheel of TV programming, to me, was one of the grandest things ever invented. I felt like, it was just, like Willy Wonka's everlasting gobstopper. It was just always there, always ready to give me something. So what I wanted to talk about just a little bit more was discoveries, right? So for example, 20 to 25 years ago, maybe a little bit longer now, people started going back to a period in film history that we now call pre-code, right? So the code refers to the Production Code Administration, the PCA, or the Hayes Office, as it was called for short. And they ran the censorship regime that, we say it told the movie studios what they could and could not screen, but in fact, it was, they were working hand in glove. The movie studios had agreed to this because they did not want government censorship. So they would go by what the PCA told them in order to avoid maybe the government coming in and doing, in their eyes, something even worse. But this particular arrangement didn't really get enforced until mid-1934. So pre-code comes with a pretty well-defined timeline. In my view, it starts around 1929. Some historians like to be more specific. They'll say March 31st, 1930. And that was the day that, I'm going to be reading this because the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, they made a pledge to abide by the production code. And it was the same one that they started enforcing in 1934. However, it was verbal and non-binding. And as the great Samuel Goldwyn said, it was not worth the paper it was written on. They were like, oh, sure, yeah, we'll abide by it. And then they continued to make movies that when we see them now, we're startled by them. I think still, there are still some of these movies that you can see and say, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. And 20 or 25 years ago, it was especially sort of shocking to people because a lot of these movies had not been seen for many years. When the production code came in 1934, one of the first things Joseph Breen, who was the head of it, did was withdraw a lot of them from circulation. Or, if they were hugely popular, like King Kong, he would, have them cut the bits that he disliked. And a lot of times those cut bits were gone forever. In some cases, they have been able to restore them. One of the ultimate pre-code films is a movie called Babyface. Anybody seen Babyface? With Barbara Stanwyck? Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, so Barbara Stanwyck is this girl who is growing up in a really, kind of not even working class, like lower class, with like a terrible father figure who, it's strongly implied he's molesting her. She gets older, she grows into a pretty woman. She doesn't want to live like this anymore. And she gets introduced to, I love this, she gets introduced to the works of Friedrich Nietzsche. And she really takes it to heart. She's like, man, this is the stuff, and she says, I am going to go out and I am going to use men for all they are worth. And she proceeds to do it, literally sleeping her way to the top. So, come 1934, you can imagine Joseph Breen looking, so they really cut it down, but eventually they rediscovered stuff that they could put back. This was 20 or 25 years ago. If you're somebody like me and you've grown up seeing these movies scissored or whatever, you would sit down and see Babyface, and it was a revelation. But I'm here to tell you, revelations in the world of classic film are happening all the time, right? So in December, there was a movie released called Babylon, right? And maybe you think I'm going to say, oh, go see Babylon. Please, don't see Babylon, or if you do, don't take it seriously as history, right? I did not care for the movie at all, but that's, because I consider myself something of a film historian. I'm going to explain to you one way that Babylon adopts like like what has been the normal view of film history, but that we are coming to understand is really not right. There is a very long scene in the middle of Babylon where Margot Robbie is making her first talkie, right? So, and it's very much based on the vision of talkies in Singing in the Rain. Right? Everybody's seen Singing in the Rain, right? You've got they've got the microphone over here, and you've got Lena Lamont going, "I can't make love to a bush," and then they have to do. So that is the vision of talkie filmmaking that we have been seeing for years, and it's accurate so far as it goes. Right? You see it in Babylon. You've got the cords running out to the truck. The camera is completely stationary. They're filming it basically like it's a play. And they have to have absolute quiet on the set. Well, guess what? That was Vitaphone. That was, the process that was used by Warner Brothers and some others. There was another corporation called Fox Film Corporation, not 20th Century Fox, but the earlier incarnation in the 1930s, run by a man named William Fox. It's a very good biography of him by a woman named Vanda Kreft, if you want to seek it out. So William Fox had a completely different way of doing sound movies. He had movie tone. Movie tone was sound on film. So they could, move the camera, right? Because they weren't recording it on some disc out in a truck, right? They were recording it simultaneously with what the camera was doing. So if you sit down and you look at a Fox pre-code, even from 1929, what you will see is not this static talkie. You see a camera moving all over the place. One example is a movie called The Sea Wolf. They made a later version of it in the 1940s. This one's from 1930. And I saw it at the Museum of Modern Art, and I was knocked sideways. This camera is going all over a moving, full-rigged ship, like up the mast or whatever. This is the furthest thing imaginable from like a static talkie. And there are a lot of movies like this, just waiting for us to see them. Many of them, I assure you, are wonderful. So then your next question may be, how come I haven't seen these? Well, the Fox movies have not really been shown much on TCM, which is how a lot of people, get acquainted with classic movies these days. But there's another, even worse, very sad explanation, which is that in 1937, there was a fire in the Fox movie vault. They were storing their nitrate films, nitrate, of course, being one of the most flammable things on earth. You can go on YouTube and watch clips of nitrate film reels burning underwater. That's how flammable they are. And one thing they didn't understand so much, they had firewalls and things, but they didn't understand that nitrate could, if it got hot enough, spontaneously combust. And that's what happened. 75% of the Fox archives were gone after this fire. Entire careers just vanished. One of the reasons we only have 2 films from Theda Bara is that her stuff was destroyed in this. But I am always, an optimist. I like to look at how, things are, moving through the future. So in the 70s, they started searching around and they found more of these Fox prints that were still in existence, things, that were out in different archives or whatever, started sending them in. And just now, even after this, we're starting to see them and discover their wonders. So the last thing I am going to discuss before I, open it up to questions, is what does this have to do with Clarence Brown? Because Clarence Brown was not, he has not been somebody who has been, many of his best films have not been especially hard to see. That's not true of The Silence. I am super excited to see Smoldering Fires and The Signal Tower. Those are not shown a lot, and that, I think, is really going to be something. But National Velvet, most of us probably grew up with that film, right? The Yearling. A lot of us have probably seen Garbo in Anna Karenina. So, what does this have to do with discovery? Well, to me, first of all, it has to do with what Gwenda has done in her biography, to talk about Clarence Brown not as just another journeyman or, skilled, studio employee, but as a man who was an artist. Like a lot of people in his generation, he was, not much for talking about himself as an artist, but that's what he was. So first of all, you have, like a historian bringing that out and saying, take another look at these movies. They are indeed art, and it's not pretentious at all to say so. Right? And then the second thing, and I think this is what is so great about the TCM Film Festival, is that the mere act of seeing these films in a theater with an audience, the way their creators, all of them, intended it to be seen is magical. You would be amazed at what it feels like to see a film that you've seen many times before, projected on a big screen from a beautiful print with everybody around you digging it like crazy. I am so excited for the beginning of this film festival and to see both the films that I've never seen before and also the films that I am hoping to rediscover with an audience. So now I am going to quit blabbing. And, and as they say on Reddit, ask me anything. Yes, sir.
2 questions. First question is, the code seems to have come in about the time talkies did. Is that a coincidence or?
Well, at talkies, The Jazz Singer was 1927, right? Then 28 and 29, you had all of the theater owners rewiring their things for sound, and that was expensive. Not all of them could do it. Not all of them wanted to do it. Some of them were even like, well, is this a fad? Do I really need to do this? So, you didn't really have everything wired for sound until 1930, but that's still a pretty big, that's still a pretty fast transition. So then, the pre-code era actually, I would not say, it does not coincide with the talkie transition, but what it does coincide with are the darkest, grimmest years of the Depression. The bank holidays, the beginnings of the Dust Bowl, thousands of children, migrating around looking for work on trains and things, bread lines. That's what it coincided with. And one of the things that, I would say to me, this is the most important part of pre-code, not even the dirty jokes, and I love a good dirty joke, but, but the fact that they are political and historical in a way that, the later films in the 30s, I would say they were still political, but they learned to smuggle it. It wasn't as open as it was in the early days. Clarence Brown did I know this is one of Gwenda's favorite too, Possessed from 1931. Is a pre-code that, it's not as cynical as Babyface, but in a way it's the same. It's Joan Crawford as a poor young woman trying to make her way through, a society that's run and rigged by men. That is a kind of theme that you weren't going to see much after July 34. So your second question?
Yeah, the other question is, did the code disappear when the rating system came in, or was that a branch of the code?
The code kind of, it was death by 1,000 cuts, right? You would have like one filmmaker like Otto Preminger making The Moon is Blue and releasing his film without a seal of approval because he wanted to use the word virgin in it. And he did this, and the film did quite well, so then everybody's like, oh, okay, so we can say virgin now. And then, just gradually moving on and on until I'm trying to remember when the rating system that we have now came in, but it took a while. There's like this transitional period where it's interesting to see people trying to figure out what they could get away with. And I think also looking at the wave of films from Europe where censorship had always been, it wasn't that they didn't have it, but it was different.
They didn't have a code in Europe?
No, that most of them did, but but they looked at like the British had their own code, for example. France also would censor things, but they had different ideas about what should be censored, right? Like they might censor you for saying something bad about a certain ethnic group or their country, or insulting politicians or things, or they might censor violence, right? American films that went to Europe sometimes were cut for violence, even though they'd been through our strict censorship regime here. But, in terms of implying unmarried people sleeping together, Europe was like, eh. And that's a generalization, obviously, it was, but...
Except our...
All right, yes?
I know you must have many favorites, but could you recommend a couple of pre-code films?
Oh gosh, well, I already mentioned Babyface. I would really recommend Possessed because it's also beautiful to look at, like the 1931. I am also fond of some of the movies made in the pre-code era that are dealing with the problems of returning veterans, because that is an issue that just never changes. There's one called The Last Flight that is about, it's sort of like a Fitzgerald movie, but it's not Fitzgerald. It's basically about like these, this group of sort of incipient alcoholics and this woman that they all kind of love, and what is happening to their lives as they're trying to, make their way through the lost generation. And there's another one called Heroes for Sale, directed by William Wellman, that is even more kind of blunt and harsh about what it was like to return from World War I, to not get the bonus money you were promised, and to walk around trying to make a living. I mentioned the children that were riding the rails and things. Another one is called Wild Boys of the Road. And that one, it stars Frankie Darro and I can't remember her name. But the young lady is very charming in it, but she didn't have much of a career because she married the director William Wellman after she made this movie. It is grim, like I saw it in Film Forum in New York City. It's, when you're watching a movie from the early 30s, you don't expect to hear the audience go as one, and they did that more than once in this movie. You like that one too, don't you, Glenda?
I'm trying to remember her name. Dorothy.
Yeah, Dorothy. That was her name. Yeah, but I can't remember her last. She's disguised as a boy traveling with these boys, and the movie is very blunt about how dangerous that is. So All right. Yes.
I mean, just add if you're interested in Pre-Code Hollywood, a friend of ours, Thomas Dorothy, has
Yeah.
written a book called Pre-Code Hollywood, and it covers that period from 1929 to 1934. It's a real treasure trove. Another one I'd add is I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang,
Yeah.
starring Paul and Judy. That one came out. It's a very dark film, too.
Yes.
Can I just ask you, because you were talking about the Museum of Modern Art series, and just a kind of practical question, like, are people, they turn up, like, how successful, is it risky for cinemas to be showing films from this era, like in terms of risky, economically risky in the face of competition from, everything like Barbie and so on? Do people go to them? Are they full?
It's weird because like the Fox like a selection of the Fox films from my friend Dave Kerr, the one of the assistant curators there, ran it's like 2018, 2019, and it did well, but not maybe like as well as they had hoped. There was like, I don't know, like this lull in film going. Then of course we all know what happened in 2020 and 2021. They started running these films again, and it's like people are, I think, really eager to get back into a movie theater. It's great being in a movie theater, seeing a good movie. I mean, like we found that out with Barbie and Oppenheimer, but I think it's been true on the revival circuit as well. He just did like a rerun of that Fox series, and I think, the houses were better than it had been like the first time around. But I think it was also that people like me were going, wow, this is a great series, and people were like, gosh darn it, I missed it. So, they're coming back.
The decline of Twitter is going to be a problem, isn't it? Because you're really active and publicizing all these things and making people take interest.
Yeah, and the new, the new version of Twitter tends to bury links.
Yeah.
So I've had to get very creative about, like telling people about things. Yes, sir.
Could you give me an assessment of what proportion of the Hays Codes were directed toward suppressing indecency and vulgarity, quotes, versus political incorrectness? I'm thinking particularly of The Grapes of Wrath. How did that movie ever make it? Because it's basically promulgating a Marxist point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one complaint about that movie over the years has been that Ford and gosh darn it, the screenwriter.
Lee Nichols.
Yes, thank you, Dudley Nichols. That they softened the political edge of that movie and made it more about like this family's journey and less about the harshness of what they're confronting. I've never really thought that was true. I think you see that movie and you get a very good idea of what was going on. But what they did was they sanded off the edges. As I remember the Steinbeck novel, he's got parts where he's just, kind of, I don't want to say ranting because that's kind of pejorative, but he's got parts where he's just talking. And there's nothing really like that in The Grapes of Wrath. So they, kind of sanded that down. They gave it perhaps a more hopeful ending than it had in the book. And I think that was how, at least in part, how they got it past the Breen office. I mean, it becomes this dance. One of the things that Tom's book our friend Tom Doherty also wrote a biography of Joseph Green. And one of the things that you see in there is like the correspondence between the filmmakers and Breen. And it was also known that sometimes they would just blatantly put something in there that they knew was not going to pass the censors, in hopes that whoever was watching it was going to have a cow over this obviously unacceptable thing and not notice the thing they really wanted to get through. I mean, definitely there was a political edge to the code, right? They had a lot of rules, like, they did not want you showing corrupt priests. They didn't really want you showing institutional corruption. They really didn't want you showing, unless you were going to make it very clear that right won out in the end. We all know, like, crime could not pay, right? Babyface, for example, crime plays beautifully for her. and after that, they were like, nope. Although you will still find occasionally lower budget movies where they managed to have crime pay. I saw a Peter Lorre low budget movie where there is not the punishment meted out at the end that I was kind of expecting for him, and I ran it past a friend of mine who is a film historian, and they said, well, like sometimes there were so many movies made, they couldn't be on top of like everything, so they would focus on the big budget stuff from the big studios. Yes.
I had the opportunity to see several of Norma Shearer's movies pre-code, and they were quite interesting.
Which ones did you see?
I don't remember.
Did you see The Divorcee?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like
good.
that one. Yeah.
And I wonder too if when they made the women, did it pass because of the ending of the movie?
Yeah, I mean, The Women was originally a play, and they did, there were some double entendre jokes in that movie, in the play, that did not make it on screen. But I don't think it had that much trouble, because it was fundamental. Yes, it's about the breakup of a marriage, right? And you have Joan Crawford, yeah. About, like this guy having an affair and destroying his marriage, right? But I think they were focusing more on the fact that he sees the error of his ways, and he goes back to Norma Shearer at the end.
The ending, which some of us thought was kind of silly.
Oh, her throwing out her arms like that? That's the thing about Norma Shearer. That some of my critic friends really feel like she was never the same after the pre-code era, where she could be like, kind of fun and sexy or whatever, and that afterward, when she started doing her great lady roles, because she got her pick of like the best, such as playing Marie Antoinette or whatever, that she got mannered, right? And that last shot, it is a little, but at the same time, I do think it's very much what the movie wants you to see, that it wants you to see this as being about, holding on to your man, accepting them despite all their flaws.
But that's like in Sunrise, my lord. She takes him back, he's going to drown her because of the hussy that's having an affair with him. And then they go to town and they get fixed up and, oh God, I love you. And then that movie's crazy. What I say sometimes to people is like, I adore Sunrise, but it's
that movie is so important to Hollywood history too, in terms of, like the effect that it had on filmmakers, making them sit up and go, oh my God, we can do this. Look at this. Look at how gorgeous this is. It had a huge effect on John Ford. You can trace the influence of Sunrise through so many of his movies. So what I always say is that there are things in film that make poetic and visual and emotional sense, but they do not make logical sense. So the task of the film and the filmmaker is to sweep you along, right? So that those poetic and visual qualities, will, overcome like the tick-tock in your brain going, she's really going to go back with him? That's, yeah. So, and for me, that's how I know I really love a movie, is, if I don't care really that much, that it's not making sense. It's true of modern movies as well. Yeah, like real life makes perfect sense, right? Brushing your teeth makes sense. Having dinner makes sense. Like I don't go to a movie necessarily because I want, like complete logical progression of events. Yes, sir.
Yeah, another recommendation you definitely get this from the library, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 31.
Oh, yeah.
Frederick March is really strong.
Yeah, and Miriam Hopkins, right, as Ivy, like very pretty obviously a prostitute in 31. When you see the, is it 41? The Q-Core version with Bergman and Tracy. Bergman is like a dance hall performer, like they would always take prostitutes, and like, have them performing like in cabarets or something. But yeah, Miriam Hopkins didn't want that part, she wanted to play the good girl. And Ruben Mamoulian told her, he was like, you're made to play Ivy. Ivy would make you a star, but I'll cast you as the boring good girl if that's what you want. She went home and she slept on it. Now, Miriam Hopkins, I love her. That woman was a classic Georgia Bell. She wanted Scarlett O'Hara. She didn't get the part. She didn't need it. She was Scarlett O'Hara, like in real life. She went home and she slept and she's like, you know what? You're right. I'm going to do Ivy and I'm going to hit it out of the park. So...
Is there any equivalent to the codes now? I mean, we have our rating system, but is there any effective censorship going on?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I don't that there's a movie right now that's playing in New York called Passages, directed by Ira Sachs. I have not seen it yet, but they were originally going to give it an NC-17. But he said, no, I'll just release it without a rating. And the reason it's getting that rating, I think it's pretty well, in addition, two things, right? It's got sex between two men, and it's quite clear what's going on. And it's got full frontal male nudity, which, in some sense is the last frontier. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, we still have. The thing about getting an NC-17 too is if you're a filmmaker, I don't know how true this is anymore, especially with the internet. But it used to be that certain theaters wouldn't run your film. Newspapers would not necessarily advertise it. A lot of them, especially like the big chain newspapers. I remember I had a friend who was an assistant editor on Goodfellas. We've all seen Goodfellas, right? Violence, can stay. I think it's violence. The level has been pushed so far, but this was 1991, and it turned out that they. They screened it to the MPAA, and they came back and they were like NC-17, and they're like, "What? You're killing us here!" And so they don't really tell you what the problem is, but so they sort of fiddled, sent it back, still NC-17. Finally, they find out that what was really bothering them was We've all seen Goodfellas, right? This is a spoiler. Plug up your ears if you like. Is the scene where Joe Pesci gets whacked, and the blood comes out his forehead. Pretty explicit shot, and it grossed them out. So this friend of mine who was working on it said, that it was coming back, and it was literally a matter of them taking like 2 frames off, sending it back, and they're like, nope, still, finally they got it to like just the right thing to where they could get an R. They were also, they were also upset about the language, but the F word is, I think, still mostly an R. I haven't seen is it okay to say the F word in PG-13 these days? I don't. Oh, well, you get 1. 2 if you're a good boy, right?
Have you noticed the erosion of NC-17 for the years? Because you had Midnight Cowboy, NC-17.
Yeah, it was technically an X, which was,
NC-17. And just this progress, do they still, well, obviously, I guess they still award it, but...
I haven't seen passages, so I don't know. I hear it's explicit. I don't know if it's Last Tango explicit, but...
It's going to be hard to overdo what's on Games of Thrones and Walking Dead. I mean, it's just...
Shoot, you can log on YouTube and see... Yeah. Yes, sir.
There is a documentary film that I believe is in our library collection. It's How This Film Is Not Yet Rated.
Yes.
It's a whole series
Yeah.
of things like your Goodfellas example. How many shits and fucks you can have to get whatever.
Yeah.
You've all heard those words, don't you?
What was the impact of the code? Did the code only really impact the filmmakers themselves, or were there repercussions for cinemas as well? Did it cover, did the umbrella of the code cover cinemas and what they screened as well, or was it purely on the production end
of things? The background of the series that I did for the Museum of Modern Art, like not this past February, the February before, was that there is a stereotype, again enforced by Babylon. Babylon is not history. Okay, see it if you want. It's not history. The idea of silent stars getting wiped out by the talkie revolution. Not that true. Some of them were on the way out anyway. So my series was really about what effect did the coming of the code have on the careers of certain actresses that I felt were very well suited to kind of the gritty, either urban or lower class dynamic of a lot of these films, but were not really suited for maybe some of the glittering screwball comedies and things that came later. I just want to be careful not to insult the rest of the 30s. I love the whole decade, but this is like kind of a division. So I think it had an effect on a lot of it had an effect on the actors. It had an effect on the screenwriters. And it had an effect on the production and what kind of books they would think about adapting, right? Like They Shoot Horses, don't they? Is a book from the 1930s. Nobody was going to touch it, until many years later. Does that answer your question, or?
I was speaking more of like the actual movie theaters. So was it all? Or would theaters see repercussions if they screened things that maybe didn't fall under the code? I guess I'm thinking in terms of, we were talking about Europe having different codes, and maybe were cinemas interested in maybe trying to bring in other things
Well, the studios controlled the movie theaters to a great degree, and one of the things that that Tom Doherty covers in both of his books, both the Pre-Code and the Joe Breen book, is that contrary to popular belief, once the code came in, movie revenues went up. People were, I don't know, maybe they felt like the code stuff was too depressing. Maybe like a lot of us today, they wanted to bring their kids, or bring mom and, and not have to, cover her ears or whatever. So, I think they were fine with it. They were in the business to make money, and the money got better. Yes.
So in the 2011 documentary story film, An Odyssey, he talks about the code. He says that the code was being very restrictive, but it also gave directors basically a creative impulse to find out how they could tell a story around the code. And so the example being you can't show two people in a bed, but then there's the director that shows them both on the phone in the bed, and when it cuts back and forth, it looks like they're in the same bed, but they're in totally separate rooms. So my question to you is, what is your favorite example of that kind of imagery where a director is able to use the structure of the code to then creatively move around it?
I so have an answer for you. Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman are falling in love, and they're on the terrace, and they're talking, and they're on the phone. And there was a time limit. I'm damned if I remember how long it was, but it was only a few seconds that a kiss could endure. So what he has them do, and it goes on for almost 3 minutes, is, they're kissing a little bit, they part, they kiss a little more, they're on the phone, they're talking. It is so romantic, and dead sexy to me, to this day. There is a similar moment in The More the Merrier, when Jean Arthur and Joel McCrea are walking home, and they're on the stoop, and it's not quite as blatant. I always feel like I see Notorious, and I'm like, Hitchcock is just daring them. So he was very good at playing innocent. He's like, oh heavens, what are you talking about? Yeah, the more the merrier is maybe not quite as blatant, but it's also it's breaking it up at just the moment that would have made it unacceptable. And full credit to Joe Breen. He was a lot about deniability, right? If you see Ernst Lubitsch's Angel, the gentleman's club in that movie is pretty obviously a brothel, but there's no dialogue that suggests it. There's nothing that really, you can point to and say, oh, she's taking money for sex. So Breen was like, okay, it's a gentleman's club. He surely knew better, but because they had not blatantly made it, in a way that he considered unacceptable, he would let it go. Yes.
Is there been any effect on TV movies that go on for several years, like Outlander or Suits, on movies now?
You mean the long form storytelling?
The ones that go on for 5 or 6 years, as opposed to movies that are over in 2 hours.
It's interesting. I mean, it would have in the 1930s and 40s. You would get B-movie serials, right? And I don't, because B-movies. There's something that I've only sort of recently been really exploring over the past, 4 or 5 years. But the serials would run one to another, and have literal cliffhangers or whatever. And then some of the ones that I personally like The Saint or whatever, would just have characters going from movie to movie, but they would not. So I guess it would be the difference between, as you say, Outlander and maybe Columbo, right, where you've got self-contained stories going on. I mean, I am not a superhero movie person, but I mean, I think there's been a long-term trend, and it's been easy for me to see, even as someone who, doesn't really go to Marvel movies, for movies that, progress over a long time, that keep you waiting, right? That may or may not be kind of pulling back now. I don't know. I mean, I have to say, taking one Harry Potter book and breaking it into 2 movies strikes me as excessive. There is a story, I do not know if it is true, but it was told to me by somebody who swore up and down it was true, that when they were first talking about adapting Harry Potter, there was a director who was interested in it, who shall remain nameless, but whose initials are Steven Spielberg, and he met with the people who owned the Potter rights, and he was like, yeah, oh gosh, I'm really excited about this. I have an idea where we can take these 6 books and we can combine them into one movie, and we're going to do this, that, and they're like, wait, one movie? Are you kidding me? How are we going to make, we only get to make money off one movie? No, that they agreed to part ways. But, artistically, maybe Spielberg was right. All right. So I think oh my goodness, we've gone over. I'm sorry. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Clearly, this was a riveting talk because nobody left and we're well over an hour. So thank you. One more thing. I just want to point out real quickly that if you didn't pick up a program, there is a lot more coming. Tonight we're having a Zoom or in-person meeting at Central Cinema. It's all in here. You can get the link if you register online. And Smoldering Fires will be playing at Central Cinema. Tomorrow here at noon again, we're going to have Chuck Malin, Farran back, and Gwenda back to talk about Clarence Brown movies. And there'll be lunch again. So I want to thank you all, and thank you, Farran.